Stay tuned because in this video I'm going over the 5 pros and the 5 cons of purchasing on WFN land. Have you been looking at homes but you just keep on getting priced out of your competition? You're just not finding the right quality for where you've been looking? Well, in this video I'm going to go over the top 5 pros and the top 5 cons of purchasing on WFN land here in West Kelowna. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos of living in Kelowna. We get people calling us every day looking to move here into the Okanagan, especially West Kelowna, as it's growing. And WFN land is a great opportunity for you. So if you have more questions, if you need more answers, reach out, pick up the phone, give us a call. I'd love to chat with you. That's what we're here for, and we got your back. All right, so let's just jump into the 5 pros and the 5 cons of purchasing on Westbank First Nation's land. Pro number 1, it's less expensive. And that's probably why you're actually looking at it. A lot of people are you really can't really find, especially these days with the rapid increase in home prices, what they're looking for and the quality of a home that they're expecting. So what we're finding is a lot of people are moving to the Westbank First Nations land where you can get a lot better quality than what you can get at different ends of the spectrum. So you can get discounts from freehold land, anywhere from, it's going to depend on the type of house and the type of product, or if it's a townhouse, but anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, even potentially upwards to $200,000 in difference for a comparable home on freehold land, depending on the location. So that's just one of the that's the first pro, and probably the biggest pro where we see a lot of people moving and purchasing on Westbank First Nations land. All right, so the most popular con is con number 1, which is you don't actually physically own the land. So you own a share of the lease, and the lease is from, it starts out from 99 years is where it used to start out with. Now for all the new leases, they're really doing 125-year leases on the new residential homes there. So as part of that lease, it really kind of indicates what your security is on it. And you don't own the land, so that's the con number 1, is really you just don't own the land. So you don't have a say what you can do with the land after the lease is done. But for much of the leases, there's really, if you have 90 years left, or 50 years left even, what's the odds of you actually physically even living in that house? So a lot of people are also purchasing on First Nations land just to really get into the market first, and a way to kind of get in at a cheaper price point and get in, so they can move into something that maybe they're more desirable down the road. So pro number 2 of living on Westbank First Nations land is the location. So it is along the highway. If you drive from Kelowna to Peachland, you drive in between Westbank First Nations land and the city of West Kelowna, in and out and throughout the whole highway. So it has a lot of desirable areas that are actually located on Westbank First Nations land, including waterfront communities. There's a number of waterfront communities on it. So just down from Casa Loma, and a lot of big developments happening right now on Westbank First Nations land. So the location, I guess, is one of the main reasons that people just love it. There's only 40% of the land of Westbank First Nations that's been developed. So they have a ton of land left to be developed, and not of just getting services to it. But you take a drive through and you're going to notice that there's lakes, there's golf courses, there's just everything that's located on Westbank First Nation, and shopping. So a lot of the shopping in West Kelowna is all on Westbank First Nations land. So making it, quite of a desirable area for people to live, work, commute, that sort of thing. All right, so con number 2 is there are lease payments sometimes. So sometimes, not all the time the case, but when the leases were initially created, because you don't own the land, that there's a lease and there's some sort of payment to whoever had the lease and was giving it up for the development. And some leases are prepaid as part of the development, where you just the developer, everybody prepays it ahead of time, and it's all factored into the pricing. However, what happens sometimes the lease is not prepaid, and so you're responsible for additional payments on top of the payments that you're paying for potential bare land stratas to upkeep the land there. So that's just something to keep in mind when you are looking. They don't all have it, but just make sure you're looking at that. See if there's any underlying ones. There's places like Sun Village, adult community, that does have a mix of maybe 50-50. And if you are buying, you could also be as part of the purchase price, pay out that remainder of the lease. But it's really comes down to it. It's all factored in the price, and everything's negotiable. So You just really factor that in when you're buying to make sure you're making a smart decision, and you factor in that payment and to make sure you're not going to be cash poor based on what you can afford monthly. And all right, so while we're talking money in your pocket, we're going to look at pro number 3, and that's you don't pay property transfer tax. So this is pretty much across the board anywhere you're purchasing. There's a couple exceptions, but we're not going to get into the exceptions, but pretty much across the board, you're probably not going to be paying property transfer tax. So if you're looking at a $500,000 purchase, that's going to save you in your pocket. Instead of needing to put a down payment on, it's going to save you about $8,000 on it. So that's 1% on the first 200,000, 2% on the balance is what property transfer tax is. So you do the math. $500,000, you're saving $8,000 for $1 million property. You're looking at savings of upward to $16,000. So that's where we have pro number 3. All right, con number 3, people getting over not being able to own the land. They're also concerned a little bit about the perception. So it comes with the perception of owning on First Nations land. When I moved here, I wish I knew a little bit more. I made it seem like there was a negative. It felt like you're maybe living on a reserve, that sort of thing. But when you look at it, the actual perception of living on First Nations land is in Westbank First Nation is kind of very outdated mentality and very outdated thinking. So please get past this perception of you're living on First Nations land, because even though I have it as a con, I really look at it and there's only 10% of the people that are living on Westbank First Nations land a band member. So you're looking at about over 9,000 people living on First Nations land, and only about 900 of them are Westbank First Nations members. So definitely not like you're living on a reserve, that sort of thing. So just definitely keep that in mind when you're looking at perception, and don't just automatically knock it because of the perceptions you have going into it. Just look a little bit further. Pro number 4 is what the new leases they're doing right now are 125-year leases. So what that means to you is you don't have to worry about necessarily your security going anywhere, because you are tied in with that lease. You have some security for the 125 years. Yes, it depends on when the lease is, when you're buying. Maybe you're buying with 20 years left in the lease. So that's all things we definitely look into when you're purchasing on the lease length, and what lenders might be also looking for when they're looking to maybe finance your property, that sort of thing. So those are all questions. Pick up the phone, give me a call, and let's discuss it. However, your security is pretty much safe for the length of the lease. Obviously, get your own lawyer to look at it, get your own due diligence, reach out. We have some good lawyers that are familiar with Westbank First Nation, so you just need to make sure you're making right decisions for you and your family. But there are 125-year leases, which are up from 99-year leases, which just helps protect what you're actually going to be paying and what you can really gain on for security. So 125-year leases, I don't know about you, but I'm not living for 125 years. I'm not probably not going to be living for, if there's 70 years left in the lease, good luck for me living on that property for another 70 years type of situation. So think about your exit strategy and how many years are going to be left on that lease if you do sell. So if you plan to sell maybe in 5-10 years to move to a different property, well, keep that in mind and really just factor that into the overall purchase and how much is going to be left on the lease. All right, so con number 4 is lending. So a lot of banks won't want to lend on Westbank First Nations land, won't want to lend on First Nations land, mainly because they're not sure about the security. WFN is a little bit different, but there are a number of good banks that are lending on it. So it's just knowing more of who you know versus what you know type of situation. So look into it. I can get you in touch with a number of different lenders that are lending on it. But also a con of it is some of the leases aren't CMHC insured. So if you don't have 20% down, you might not be able to go ahead with financing on a property if you don't have that CMHC insured. So it is just one thing to look at, and the different types of leases, every lease is a little bit different, and banks treat each lease a little bit different as well. So it's not a one size fits all situation, but that's where you reach out, you give us a call, and we'll get you in touch with the right lawyers to be able to help you and guide you along in this purchase. So you're making an educated decision. But there are lenders that will help, and they will lend on First Nations land. So don't let that scare you away. All right, so we got the final pro number 5 is that the Westbank First Nation
is one of the most progressive First Nations in Canada, and I would argue they might be up there with a lot of the most progressive cities in Canada as well. How I look at it is really a lot of the First Nation, when you go to West Kelowna and you visit West Kelowna, maybe you live in West Kelowna, a number of the different businesses are actually all on Westbank First Nations land. So grocery stores from Superstore to Canadian Tire, Winners, Home Depot, Walmart, all these different big box stores are on First Nations land. So they are one of the most progressive First Nations, and they are providing a lot of amenities to the city of West Kelowna, to the people of West Kelowna. So that is pro number 5. They're very progressive, forward thinking, and I think they'll keep that in mind too, going forward with how they're progressing with their leases and what happens with developments, maybe at the end of the lease type of situation, because they do definitely have a great positive impact to Westbank, to West Kelowna, and the Westbank city center. So that is definitely pro number 5. All right, and con number 5 is Westbank First Nation has been growing. As of the rest of the Okanagan has been growing, and it's really putting a slight into being able to keep up with the growth. And that is, I guess, one of the cons of it is that you obviously, anytime you're dealing with cities, there's obviously all the intermingles within the city, but also inside the Westbank First Nation, have to take into account, just having the personnel and everything like that to be able to keep up with the growth and in an efficient way, as well as using services and stuff like that, because a lot of the lands, some of it's through Westbank First Nation, some of it's freehold, and you kind of go in and out of different lands. A lot of the services, it's really tough to keep track of, and the two cities the city of West Kelowna and the Westbank First Nations do have to work together to really kind of get a seamless transition. So one of the 5th con is the growth in the infrastructure on it. 40% of the Westbank First Nations land is fully serviced according to the Westbank First Nations website. So there's a number, over half of the properties, half the land in the Westbank First Nation, which is all really desirable land for the most part. And a lot of development is going to be happening on it, from multifamily to single family residences. So keep a watch on it as the city of West Kelowna does grow, as Westbank First Nation does grow. You can see a lot of these developments coming up, but it's really just making sure we get the right services to be able to service the properties. All right, so there you have it. There is the 5 pros and the 5 cons of living on Westbank First Nations land. Please hit that like button if you haven't already. Hit subscribe so you don't miss out future videos. But wait. There's more videos coming up here. So click on one of those videos and I'll see you next week.